There has always been chaos in the world, and that is invariable. Only the strongest and those blessed by God survive. They are admired, vaunted as idols. Those who remain defeated or enemies of society, who manage to disappear, in the memory of many will remain only known members of an evil organization. Yes, the very organization you're looking at. It has a name and a history of its own. Whether one corresponds to the other, you'll only find out by delving into the life of the Shadow of Death organization itself. It's time to introduce you to one of the members of the organization. Her name is Serena Ravai. This beautiful girl is like a ray of sunshine. Her short hair is golden and her eyes look like you can see the whole sky. Her figure fits well with the words graceful and sporty. By habit, she was standing with a straight posture and in deep thought, waiting for the class, because she was assigned to the 5th training center. She was pensive because she really wanted to go to the 1st, because she was interested in fencing, and they specialized in it. The 5th training center is not particularly popular. Training there is hard, there is no point in it according to the students, and it specializes in survival training. We can assume that the hard learning is because of the instructor who teaches there. He wasn't very loyal to the newcomers, and he wasn't very loyal to the other students either. His eyes were like shards of the coldest ice, his hair dark as an echo of darkness. His sternness and cold-bloodedness was emphasized by his dark cloak, but the long sword in his strong hands was frightening. The whole image seemed to be created under his name, for he was called the Ice Demon. His rough voice sounded like thunder. He ordered number 23 to take a step forward, and the girl under that number only glanced at the teacher fearfully. The task was simple, but in words she needed to bare her sword and attack the coach. With a brief nod and signaling that the task was clear, she stepped onto the field and began the battle. Meanwhile, Serena pondered over what was happening. She knew that her classmates' swordsmanship skills were average, but the skills of the Ice Demon and the other teachers from the 5th center, she had no idea. It was a curious sight to see. No matter what kind of teacher he was, he despised his students, which was unreasonable of him. Why he behaved like that is not clear. The student, worried but determined, stands opposite the teacher. Her gaze is serious, but there is a spark of ambition and a desire to win. In her hands is a light but powerful sword, which she wields with confidence. Her movements are energetic, eager to show off her skills and prove herself worthy of fighting such a serious opponent. This moment happens so quickly that the audience doesn't realize what has happened. The student's sword ends up on the ground, and so does the student. It was a very clumsy fall. The victory in swordsmanship cost the demon nothing, but showed him the level of his new students. After not pleasantly berating the defeated girl, he asked the apprentice what her mistake was, but she didn't even have time to confront her opponent, and she had already dropped her sword. She couldn't give a correct answer to the question she was asked. She just looked disappointedly at the ground and sobbed, either from powerlessness or from shame. Maybe someone from the group would give an answer to the question. There was dead silence at first, but someone managed to suggest that she was swinging her sword around a lot. The criticism from the outside was not very pleasant to listen to, but one had to. Serena, on the other hand, spoke more objectively, expressing that the girl gave up quickly. This interested the experienced demon, but he wanted to know what was the reason for such a lightning-fast defeat. One should not bare one's sword unless there is no intent to kill, and until someone else has slit one's throat, a swordsman should strive to survive to the end. It was an interesting reflection and stood out to me, but it proved wrong for the coach. But Serena didn't understand anything. In a swift motion, the Ice Demon approached her with his sword, but she got her wits about her in time and drew her weapon, remembering the number 23 movement, and very timely. Serena was able to defend against the first hit and put up a block. The duel begins with light movements and swift attacks. The teacher demonstrates incredible agility and precision in his every move, while Serena, focused and ready to fight, tries to keep on equal footing. And now they stood opposite each other, holding their swords at their opponent's body. Serena's sword reached the demon's slightly bloody chest, and his sword stopped at the girl's thin neck, to which she gave a questioning look. And what was wrong this time? How do you explain these actions? Was her mistake in hitting the bone and therefore leaving her opponent alive? Which was wrong again. A technique that students have learned before that can be used to kill with a single blow is Shadow Strike. You should not use it as a defense or prolong it with it. Did that punch really cause all of this? A mistake is a technique that the coach was going to change to a different technique. The young student, number 23, defeated by her teacher, was still unable to recover from the defeat. She thought that if you don't have confidence, you shouldn't reveal yourself, to which the teacher replied with a confident exclamation. If you can't kill, you won't be allowed to stay alive. It was a statement Serena would remember for a long time. For that day she realized the skills of the instructor that everyone feared. Training was not easy. The young men had to run 20 laps and practice the shadow kick 18 times each, and also do 100 reps each and don't remember to rest. No one managed to contradict the teacher. It would have been worse for them. Turning his attention to the female students he defeated in the duel, naming them by the number 23 and 7, the demon gave them a special gift by tossing in another 10 laps and 50 reps each. And of course, no complaints. I don't think it would have helped them in any way, though. Time after time, the disciples ran the same circle multiple times, swinging their sword hundreds of times. It was indeed a very harsh training session, and the rumors were not rumors. It seemed as if the students would begin to express their discontent under the pressure of such training. But so far, it was quiet. The demon stood and watched the newcomers adjust to their new workloads, which Serena noticed. His intimidating, cold-blooded eyes, full of displeasure, was visible from far away, which did not escape the student's notice. Serena was surprised that she had hurt him in the shoulder, and he didn't even give any sign that he might be hurt, or at least uncomfortable. No, he's just standing there stone-faced. Who the hell is he? In any case, underestimating him was one mistake, and that mistake cost Serena the loss. But she gained more in return, for she learned an important lesson. For now, for the sake of reviving the Reveil family, she has succeeded in unraveling a death knell. Disappointment in the fifth center did not turn out to be so and disappeared altogether. The first lesson gave me strength and made me try harder, and the coach was still standing there manfully watching the practice. And yet, he felt the pain that the battle had brought to him. The girl had hurt Demon's shoulder, and it hurt like hell. He wanted only one thing, to heal the wound that was tormenting him so much. But it was probably his toughness and composure that kept his feelings at bay. The Ice Demon has become a retired third-rate gangster, remembering how things were so much better in the old days. But now he holds a grudge against our Serena. Number 7 was not so simple, for she managed to thrust her sword into his shoulder. That's exactly what the demon thought. There was such hope in her eyes, you'd assume Serena was a hero. But the teacher was puzzled. Why would a hero specialist go to an evil organization? The apprentice continued to look at the demon and smile, much to his annoyance. He stood there squirming from the wound she had inflicted on him, though he didn't show it, while she ran around and smiled lightly at him. What a cheeky girl. That was how it was in the eyes of the angry demon, and now he was thinking that this student could be a pain in the ass and ruin his life. The thoughts surprised him, and yet he stood and waited for her to give up, planning to ignore her in the future. But the anger didn't subside, and he was already living with the desire for revenge. Serena's desire to study harder gave her more energy, where she channeled it. Demon's life, or rather Ken Ronald's, had led him to this organization for a simple reason. He needed to earn something. Junior instructor at Shadow of Death wasn't the worst option, but teaching must have annoyed the hell out of him. The training continued, but not as efficiently as at the beginning. The children were already falling off their feet and falling on the grass, unable to continue running or doing sword exercises. They were not even afraid of the teacher's possible displeasure now. The girl on number 23 tried her best to continue doing the exercises, but all the same, the pain in her body was making itself felt. Serena was still not bad and continued to train. For her, as well as for others, it was also a big workload. She had no strength left, but she was not willing to give up. Some purpose was driving her. My arms, legs, my whole body was numb, and it was only the first training session. What will happen next? Will the young body be able to adapt to such loads? To look at the trainer, one would think that he was standing there with such a cold stare and making sure that everyone obeyed his instructions. In fact, he was thinking about his wound. It was really bothering him, and he was patiently waiting for the student to give up so he could go to the nurse's station and eat. Serena looked at him and tried harder and harder. She really wanted to finish the workout. The teacher didn't understand what he was doing here, because he didn't get paid for overtime, but he had to wait and keep himself in control. Just a little longer and he can head to the nurse's station, but it seems not everything is happening as he wants it to happen. The girl's small hands went completely numb, her sword falling to the ground with a shriek. She wasn't breathing steady. It seemed like a breeze would blow, and she would fall for that sword. But there's only a little bit left to complete the training. You can see her body is not made of steel. This fragile body had endured a tremendous amount of stress and needed to rest, so her body took it. Seeing what had happened, the coach ended the session. His reaction to Serena's fall was filled with different emotions. First, he was glad that now he could go to rest, and second, he was surprised that after coming all this way, she gave up so easily. Upon hearing the comforting news, the students wandered back to their rooms with their last strength. But they didn't even have the energy to rejoice at the end of such torture. Serena didn't have to go. She was unconscious, and Demon had no choice but to take her on his wounded shoulder and carry her to the infirmary, which he was very angry about. It was one thing to have an unpleasant lesson and a wound on his shoulder, but it was another to carry around exhausted students who had already pissed themselves off. It's amazing that for such a strong demon, this girl was a huge burden, and he barely made it to the bed. He didn't understand why some girl was giving him so much trouble. The room was too hot and stuffy. It made Demon think of resting while the girl lay unconscious. That's right, a third-rate villain doesn't need much to stand around. Now when the Demon woke up revenge, he wanted to know more about the one that brought him so much trouble in the last hour. So the first thing he decided to do was to disarm her and put away the sword. And then we'll see what happens next. The man saw something he didn't expect. A lot of life-threatening things, like toxic weapons, daggers, and throwing stars, all hidden in her clothes wherever possible. Is that even legal to carry around? Is she a spy? These findings led Demon to similar thoughts, and yet the girl looked quite harmless. But the emblem on her gold ring brought me closer to a guess. The symbols on the ring are the coat of arms of the famous Ravei fencing family. If she's a noble spy? And what was the teacher to do now, since she was his trainee, and there was a chance that he might get his small salary cut or fired if this got out? Now that's no task. Such problems led the gloomy teacher to even darker thoughts. Accidents happen a lot during training, and especially in such organizations, so the girl could just be buried. But if it's to be killed, it must be done quickly and surely. For heroes like Serena, crises are just a stepping stone to becoming stronger. So to be successful, Demon had to come up with a plan. While the secret enemy was thinking of a plan, Serena was sleeping sweetly and wandering through the realm of Morpheus. She remembered her father. He was sick and apparently very ill. Maybe it's time to find a healer. To which my daughter replied that she would try to think of something. Ravai is the clan who managed to establish the stone sword, one of the 3 great styles of swordsmanship. But time does not stand still. The stronger the rock, the easier it becomes, covered with moss. And now, the stone sword became an obsolete style. The Ravai clan rapidly collapsed, but her father tried to pass on all his knowledge to his favorite daughter. The health of the leader of the family was at an end. He became so ill that even the priests gave up. Serena succeeded him, and knowing how much effort her father had put into reviving the clan, she set a clear goal for herself to find a solution so that the Ravai clan would regain its former strength. But was there really no other way but to inherit the stone sword? Would a different style have been the solution? But she didn't know them all. Those were the right thoughts. She needed to learn all 3 great styles. Even if the fire of war cannot be mastered due to intermittent momentum, the shadow strike of the shadow of death is quite possible. Serena was brought out of her musings by her father, calling her name affectionately. She was very glad of him, and ran up to him at that hour, inquiring after his well-being. Diving into his strong embrace, Serena buried her face in his chest and hurried to tell him her thoughts, that she'd been thinking about for the last few minutes. But the man interrupted her. The daughter's face was in her father's blood. Now she looked up at him fearfully. My father was covered in blood, but he didn't die. He kept saying, "The future of the Ravai family now depends on you, remember that." She woke up in a cold sweat. From the strange prediction, it was like a prophetic dream. But it was hard to realize the boundaries of reality and subconsciousness. It was easier to blame it on the fact that it was just a bad dream. Which she did. Serena didn't know where she was. She'd been on the practice field, but she was on a bed somewhere. It didn't take long to guess, as she had already been asked if she was from Ravai's lineage. The instructor asked her the question, and he unceremoniously held her family ring in his hand. Now she felt like she was sitting on something sharp. It was her shurikens. It was bad. She'd been exposed, and now we had to get out of here. But she wasn't in the torture chamber or the infirmary. She was in her trainer's room, which put her even more in a stupor. The silence did not last long. The demon continued to speak, for he did not understand the whole picture. Ravai had fallen, and his descendant, who was a master swordsman, had appeared in the shadow of death. Was there not even pride left in the rusty stone sword? It was a provocation, and Serena didn't want to give in to it. That would be very foolish of her. The young heiress took the shuriken with a sharp movement and wanted to toss it up, but the demon wouldn't allow it. Another action that confirmed his hunch and further confused Serena in her metamorphosis of who this man was. The demon continued the story, recalling the 3 styles in swordsmanship. The first style is Reveal Stone Sword. The second is the Shadow Strike of the Shadow of Death. And finally, the third was the Flame of War. Oh, to demonstrate it was not easy, for his shoulder was still aching, but Demon had enough strength to keep his face. Serena watched in rapt attention as the instructor demonstrated the very legendary Flame of War to her. What's a swordsman's descendant doing here? Probably the same as a swordsman's heir. It was fate. They were destined to meet here one day. But why he had revealed his secret, and so easily found out that she was here to revive the Reveal family, and who she was. These thoughts nagged at the heiress, and the demon's plan was going according to plan. For now she was sure to mistake him for the heir, and think their goals were similar. Serena decided to ask him directly why he had revealed his secret. The answer was that he had been studying a fusion style that combined Flame of War and Shadow Strike. And now he wanted to share his knowledge with Serena. That answer should have satisfied her, and thus reinforced his legend. The style needed tweaking because you never know what side effects might show up, he continued. To back up his lie, he said, "It is not possible to teach fusion to those who were not originally talented." These words really made sense, for an incomplete style would put a lot of strain on the body. So now the instructor would experiment on Serena? That's right. But she'd have to be willing to put her life on the line. But in the instructor's mind, she was already a corpse. On the other hand, it was a great chance to improve the stone sword and continue his lineage. Not knowing, of course, the demon's true intentions, what response will follow from Serena? Will she agree to perfect her fusion style with her named heir? I mean, she's secretly accepted as an apprentice. But should she trust him? And after all, he had shown her what was clearly a flame of war. And if the apprentice was able to combine it with the stone sword and shadow strike, it would be something perfect. Serena couldn't pass up a chance like this, and without much thought, she said yes. Now the mouse was in the trap. The only thing left to do was to close it. The instructor was jubilant, and the goal would be accomplished. It was the next day. Training was in full swing. The trainer talked about how important a strong lower body was to a swordsman, and told him to wear rough iron shackles during training sessions. But isn't it dangerous to do such loads during the training period, because you can throw off your skates that way? So the instructor said to take the root of the velvet tree 3 times a day, to make the pain easier to bear, and to put plasters on the calluses, all of which he presented to his young student. And there was nothing left for her to do but agree and accept. The tincture was fake, but it was all meant to be, for Ken would be glad for her speedy demise. It's been another 10 days. Serena fell from her feet and lay on the grass again. Is she really dead? Dare a man who's been waiting for this to happen dare to suggest so? After all, it was a matter of time that seems to have been resolved. But no, another 10 days had passed and hope still lived in Demon, just as Serena remained alive. Another 10 days and all in vain. The victim was fighting for her life and her ideas, but Ken saw it in a distorted way. Now he didn't understand how he could be if she was so tenacious. His frustration struggling with despair. The usually thoughtful instructor sat at his desk with his hands on his head, thinking about the girl he wanted to get rid of so badly. He didn't understand what was wrong with her. She was only getting stronger instead of weaker. His train of thought was interrupted by the one he was thinking about. Serena walked into his room and wondered what he was thinking about. But it would only stay in his head. The base for more serious training was ready, and from tomorrow, they could start it. This statement surprised the student, and yet, the conversation ended there. Ken had nothing to say to her, and he sent her back to her room. It sounded rude, but she couldn't reproach him in any way. He wondered what he would do now for future workouts, so that he could get it over with as soon as possible. He wondered how she had managed to last 30 days with such physical exertion. There was a knock on the door of Demon's room. He assumed it was number 7, but his colleague entered, apologizing for his sudden arrival. Everyone has learned that the 5th instructor spends a lot of time with the number 7, but there was nothing wrong with that, after all. He's just giving advice and training, and nothing more. A co-worker thought he had a crush on Serena, his own intern, but Demon quickly crossed his mind without giving room for doubts and angrily spat out his hot drink. How anyone could think of such a thing he didn't understand. He wanted to get rid of her as soon as possible. Did the ice baby melt? Managed to surmise a co-worker, wiping his face guiltily. Though what did he care? Rubbing his face, he headed for the exit. Ken stared at his colleague and didn't bother. Why had he even come? Nothing just happens, and the guest couldn't get past the table. He grabbed from the stack of papers, some one sheet, while the demon stood with his back to him. He must be the one who came for him, looking so enthusiastically at some piece of paper. This couldn't have been missed by a passing number 23. Each style of fencing has its own method that includes a special one-punch attack. Shadow Strike targets vital points, Flame of War tears gaps in enemy defenses, Stone Sword deals damage no matter how good the defense is. And if the merging of styles is inappropriate, it can ruin everything. So you have to take advantage, the instructor explained. Abruptly pulling out his sword, he displayed a magnificent display of his skill. The lights flew towards Serena but didn't hit her, and she stood bravely, only covering her face with her hand. It was a firework of red sparks, and it gave him a great deal of pain. His wrist was unbearably sore now, but he did not let it show as usual. A mixture of Flame of War and Shadow Strike techniques. A deadly swordsmanship that combines speed and deception. Well, at least that's how it's supposed to work in theory. There was a sense of power and strength in this tentative attempt. But what would happen if you put all the energy in? It was breathtaking for Serena. And for the instructor, it was just a game of watching his student trust him and want to get on with the training. Her attitude didn't go unnoticed. If you add the style created by the teacher to the stone sword, you will get a deadly blow, capable of destroying everything in its path. But do not forget that at any moment you can die yourself. And is it really possible? The instructor proudly replied that he wouldn't have otherwise wasted his time teaching someone like Serena. If you think about it that way, he doesn't seem to be lying, the student suggested. But the instructor himself couldn't believe that she trusted him so easily. A common crook. It made him laugh. The chance to learn the death knell was very motivating for Serena, and she promised not only herself, but also her instructor, that she would succeed because she had a worthy goal in mind. But the bandit really didn't care, for he had his own goals in mind. He only reminded him that there was no turning back, and they would start here and now. Perhaps his cherished goal will now reach its limit. But again, it's only a matter of time. It's been 1 year. The instructor ended the training, which really angered Serena. How could this even happen? He sat staring at the paper, realizing that he had wasted a whole year and had not achieved his goal. His student had only gotten stronger and stronger, and he didn't understand. What had he done wrong? This kind of training should have put her out of commission, and he was very angry and didn't want to talk or hear anything back, but you had to get out of the situation. It wasn't just about physical exertion. He started to get to it, but his nerves failed him, and he tried to chase the student away. He was annoyed that she was just there. Demon tried to focus on his paper, but Serena wouldn't go away. She admitted she had been stupid, and now asked me to teach her everything else as well. And for some reason the instructor failed. Gritting his teeth, he gave his consent. Between then and now, 10 days have passed as the young heiress has started learning different subjects under the guidance of the 5th instructor. These subjects included philosophy, physics, history, and even magic. The instructor's body of knowledge seemed to be greater than any scholar's. But how do you make sense of it? He fell asleep right at the table on the books. Covering him with her cloak, she gave him her sad and sympathetic gaze, and headed for the exit, carefully opening the door so as not to wake up her mentor. Someone met her in the hallway, ordering her to look at him. Serena looked around in surprise, and saw the 3rd instructor, not realizing what was going on. Now the 3rd instructor also knew that she and the 5th instructor had become quite close. He learned this from the 4th instructor, who had apparently told everyone about his observations. Serena didn't deny it. It was pointless since she went to 5th Center. But this answer only angered the already formidable instructor. Did she not understand what he was saying? Turns out he knew all along that she was a spy for Ravaille, and now he was demanding to know all her swordsmanship. But she couldn't, and now she was giving him her own terms. If he left her alone, she'd stay in one piece. It was a bold statement from the trainee to the instructor, but I think she knew what she was saying. It sounded bold, and clearly didn't please the older man. Whatever family she was from, there was no way the trainee could threaten him. I think it smelled fried and the fight was starting. She was now facing the torture chamber, and to avoid getting there, she dived into the fray, defending herself with her sword. Her concentration was maxed out, and now that the opponents were not far apart, The instructor was sweating blood that oozed right out of his chest. Serena's face was covered in his blood. She stood looking at this picture, wondering what to do next. She just wanted to scare him. She had no intention of killing him. But who would believe her? The floor was covered in his blood, and the sword of the defeated lay beside him. Serena was strong in intelligence, but she had no idea she'd be so strong. But after all, if the third instructor asked about her relationship right up front, then the others must be aware of it too. And before the teachers storm in here, and they will be here, because their battle was clearly not a quiet one. "We gotta get out of here!" She ran as fast as she could, but the chase came up behind her. It's very good that she noticed it in time. In a running, well-honed motion, the young leader began to draw her sword, which was always with her. Meanwhile, the teacher just woke up from some noise, and at the most interesting point in the dream, Number 23 burst into the office. He immediately asked her what the fuss was about. Number 7 knocked out the third instructor and escaped. Naturally, this will bring everyone to their feet. Ken was very angry. His face was already unhappy, and now it was twisted with anger. As he stepped out into the hallway, he saw the bloody body of the third instructor. And he had been asking about Serena earlier, as there was an investigation into espionage charges. But had he really guessed her mission? And how long ago? Pondered the demon. Now if Number 7 is suspected of espionage, he too could get caught in the hot hand. He had to act now. The first place he knew where she ran to was the West Woods, and the rest of the first and second instructors rushed after her, wasting no time. Instructor 4 must have just listened to the report. The instructors ran after her. It was bad. And even the fourth instructor found out. But the fifth was never told anything, which said that he was also a suspect, and now he had to run like Serena. After asking if they had alerted their superiors, Demon headed for his room, and the girl only had time to tell him in the wake of the answers that numbers 11 and 8 went to the report. He didn't stop asking, but began packing his belongings into a small backpack and putting on a dark cloak that would hide him perfectly in the darkness. Now that the fifth instructor was assembled, he instructed everyone to assemble and go to headquarters with the fourth instructor, and went to get Number 7 himself. In a trembling voice, the girl wanted to recall some instruction from the first instructor, but the man rudely interrupted her, making it clear that his decision did not belong to the discussion. Now Number 23 left his room, clearly relieved that the conversation was over. The demon threw his hood over his head, concealing his appearance, jumped out the window, and ran to meet the dark forest. As he walked a little deeper into the woods, he saw a gruesome scene of 2 instructors lying down and a fallen tree. I mean, she could have taken one down, but why 3 at once? What did the tree do wrong? She's a monster, not a girl. The deeper into the forest, the more fallen people he saw there. But he knew in which direction he was going, and without wasting time, he set off at a run. And again the people and trees lying unconscious, and it stressed the teacher out. Serena heard some sound, and fearing nothing, asked who was there. Her appearance was haggard and tired. All her clothes, hair, skin were covered in someone else's blood. But not a hair had fallen from her head. Their meeting was inevitable. Now the student stood opposite her teacher with her sword bared. A silent scene in which only her eyes spoke hung. She knew he was coming, even though she hoped not to meet him. There was no other way. But why did she pull out her sword? It frightened the trainer, and he had no choice but to pull out his own. Serena now felt she had to pay for the favor to her enemy, to which the latter only became in a fighting stance. Serena started to run at him, intending to attack. But not a single muscle on Demon trembled. He stood like a stone. Her eyes burned with passion for life and its purpose. Ken's eyes were filled with anger and fear. He was afraid of his apprentice, for he had seen how easily she dealt with her enemies, and he might be next. And now, bloody but still full of strength, Serena. Her sword, like a bayonet, wanted to pierce her teacher with it. She stabbed him in the shoulder, just as she had done once before at the first training session. But now the wound was more serious, and Serena's face pierced with emotion. Behind her stood the second instructor, who clearly wanted to stick a small dagger in her back. It didn't work, for there was a long sword in his heart, and the dagger popped out of his hand, making it clear that the master would not hurt anyone. He fell like a rag doll and lay on the grass in the middle of a huge forest. Serena was just beginning to realize what had happened, but she didn't catch the moment the second instructor appeared. But she didn't understand why the teacher didn't kill her, but the instructor. She had injured him for the second time, often annoyed him with her presence, and now the whole organization was looking for her. Demon thought that the second instructor was let down by his own emotions, and that's why he lost his miserable life. But Demon also remembered that he could be next, as they say, "Tongue is my enemy." But to keep her relaxed, the coach emphasized that she remained still clumsy and stupid, covering her shoulder where the wound was roaring with her palm. How on earth? Serena looked disappointed and lost. Ignoring the bleeding wound, the teacher began pulling something out of his bag. It was a small pouch that he presented to his student. Inside it were the essentials and a map for Serena to follow. She was going to kill him. And he was being kind to her, an act that made her even more stunned. To keep her from deluding herself too much, Ken decided to bring her down to earth. She was just bait, and he made no secret of it. His own colleagues wanted him dead. Why not use his student to distract them? Well, Serena, now live with the realization that you're the bait. But on the other hand, it was a great opportunity to repay his teacher for his kindness. Why would it be all of a sudden? That reaction surprised him. But if she wasn't taken as bait, Demon was in trouble. And she was still standing in front of him, not leaving. What more could she want from him? Maybe money? Which he immediately offered her just to get her to leave. Serena was silent, some regret or sympathy struggling inside her. Could it be that he's being so nice to Serena because she needs to be bait for a possibly long time, is it not? There was no time and she had to go. Before leaving, Serena wished her teacher had a true and more worthy successor than she did, to which the man only smirked and thought that there were no more idiots like him who would sacrifice their lives to learn. Such a reaction was unexpected for the student. She only looked sadly at the body, the instructor who was still recently alive, and at the empty clearing that her teacher had quickly abandoned. It was already deep into the night, but thanks to the moon, you could see the daytime. Demon stood on the edge of the cliff, and those approaching him seemed to be the surviving instructors and their trainees, trying to push him to a standstill. The first instructor spoke to him, mocking his choice. How could he prefer some girl to an organization? But the choice was inevitable. Ken wanted to devote himself to the art of fencing, but the organization clearly did not expect such a thing. And it was not even believed that thanks to fencing, he would be able to save himself one day. So now there's not even any other option but to pull out your sword and engage in battle? Apparently not. The first instructor did him the honor of allowing him to meet death with sword in hand. It would be very impolite to refuse the lady, even though her shoulder continued to whimper with endless pain. Noticing the wound, the first instructor assumed it was inflicted by the second instructor, but Demon didn't give away the secret, and with a serious expression on his face, dismissed any doubts of concern. She wished she had been present during that fight. Demon was tired of such conversations. He made it clear that he was not going to lose and hurried to end it all. The first instructor began her offense by running towards the opponent. Their swords were better than some words. Ken's blade was enveloped in a spiral of bright flames of fire, repelling all enemy attacks. One steep shadow shift. And yet the illusion of battle was beautiful too. There could only be one winner in this battle. Who could it be? Each of the three main styles of fencing has its own characteristics. The stone sword is immune to any of the opponent's defenses. Shadow Strike is unrivaled in a swift victory. Flames of War causes damage with a retaliatory strike after blocking an attack. These characteristics inflict trauma. Unfortunately, the Flame of War is weak against the stone sword that breaks defenses, but strong against counterattack and comparable to the real enemy of chopping shadows. So, in theory, there's a chance our villain could win. But to overcome the difference in physical strength and one mastery of style, impossible. Such a small subtlety in theory cost Demon's life. And here he was being held over the precipice by his strong neck, by the first instructor, having punctured his stomach through and through. Maybe if it wasn't for the shoulder injury, the loser would be harder to determine, the instructor sympathized naively. But a defeated swordsman doesn't need sympathy, much less our Demon. He accepted his defeat with dignity. However, he warned that his student would not leave such a thing to chance, to which the first instructor only laughed evilly and assured that soon the heiress of the Reveille family would follow her teacher's lead. The dialogue was over. The victor of the bout drew her sword in a swift motion and let her colleague go into the abyss, where he flew backwards, intending to sink into the ground under the weight of his body. The first instructor stood and watched her opponent fly downward. But it was time to leave and look for the one that had gotten her teacher into the abyss. So the order was catch number 7. Now that the teacher was defeated, the likelihood of him surviving was practically zero. There was no point in being Serena's bait. Looking away, she saw one of the organization's interns coming at her with a sword. His doom was certain. He who comes with the sword will fall by the sword. Few, if any, could stand against a skilled swordswoman, if such a hero existed at all. The heiress bent over and plucked a scrap of fabric from his clothes and wiped her bloody sword with it. She kept score, and it was the 30th. Thanks not only to fencing, but also to the survival skills acquired from the 5th instructor, Serena managed to stay afloat in the midst of a chase. She didn't realize this immediately, but only with experience. These survival skills were learned through fighting death. But what kind of life would it take to have to master something like this? I wish Serena knew that, but I guess it's not meant to be. She was walking in deep thought, but a loud voice brought her out of it, reminding her that she was still being hunted. She was surrounded, trapped in a field surrounded not only by enemies but also by trees. The 1st instructor was confident of her victory and watched, arms crossed on her chest. Her prey, I guess she wouldn't have been so confident coming on her own. She had all the swordsmen of the elite Shadow of Death army with her. What should Serena do, and what will she do in this situation? The instructor spoke first, making a generous offer: surrender and save your life. It was known that the 1st instructor was a man who kept his word, and Serena was mindful of this. But does that sentence make sense? Saving a life to rot in some dungeon? I guess the inspector was tired and wanted to get it over with and leave quickly, but she realized that the 5th instructor's successor wouldn't give up so easily. Only for some reason, Serena was hurt that she'd been named the heir to the flame of war. Only one thing: she's the last one to be trained by the 5th instructor. Dead people aren't supposed to take on apprentices. The realization of this seemed to whip Serena, her disappointment impossible to hide. Demon, like Serena, joined the organization for the sake of gaining more knowledge of the art of swordsmanship. But the elders also wanted to learn his skills. When the experience is passed on, the value of using it disappears. So in a display of swordsmanship, he sacrificed himself for Serena, which horrified her more and more because she already owed him. If it wasn't for her, her teacher's death wouldn't have come so soon. The 1st instructor admitted that she killed him in a fair fight, sword in hand. But the student couldn't believe that he had lost to his opponent. And if it hadn't been for his shoulder injury, who knows? Maybe fate would have been on his side. The shoulder, which Serena has injured twice, made itself felt today. His wound? It will be a burden on the student's soul. He died, and prepare to die, said the 1st instructor, Serena. Before she could even speak and prepare to die, the instructor fell from the spy's sword. She was followed by her allies, all bathed in blood. No mercy for anyone. She killed her enemies in packs as if it cost her nothing. Chasing knowledge, Serena was losing those she cared about so easily. Henceforth, she became the last successor to the sword. Being born a warrior is what she was destined to be. And as a first-rate swordsman, she has pledged to destroy all. Only sobs and pleas for mercy were heard in that clearing, for no one wanted to die by Serena's sword. Someone's hand was visible, wearing a black glove from beneath the white cloth. The white cloth covered someone's body as if protecting them from the outside world. Someone rose to his feet. It was Ken, bruised wherever possible, but alive, with his usually unsatisfied face. Nausea came up to his throat. He sat on his knees and burped blood. He felt dizzy. Such flights from heights were clearly not something he had done often, and such a reaction was natural. One thing that pleased the teacher was that everything went according to his plan. Even all his belongings were preserved. Yeah, he fell off a cliff, but rather than give in to panic, he kept a cool mind, thanks to which managed to open in time pre-prepared white parachute, who saved him from possible death. The demon was unspeakably glad that after what had happened, he had managed to escape. Now it was just a matter of surviving. One didn't feel so bad. He didn't care about the whole world's attitude towards his personality, and he never hid it. But working in the organization was not bad, even though the salary was small. The only thing that upset him was the pension. In today's reality, the chances of finding something worthwhile are very low. After thinking over the situation, Ken made a clear decision for himself. Tomorrow, everything would start from scratch. As a real third-rate villain. And somewhere out there, on the rock from which the teacher fell, Serena appeared at that spot. Her appearance spoke for herself. Tattered, tired, dirty with blood, and also lost. Suddenly, at the edge of the precipice, she noticed the teacher's sword that was lying lonely after the massacre. She ran up to it and recognized it as soon as she picked it up. Raising him to the heavens, from her lips came the words that she would repay her teacher for his favor by being sure to survive. The oath was, "I swear by my sword, until I lose all my blood and pride, I will retain knowledge." This vow made headlines around the world. The hero gave his word to become a great swordsman. This is the story that was known only to the two of them, and a farewell message to her first and last mentor. A bright, cozy room, palm trees visible from the window, and a delicacy of white snake on a stick. What could be better for Serena, who was eating her lunch with gusto? In front of her stood a young man with a clay teapot in his hands. He was obviously worried. The young man was handsome. Through his short-sleeved white shirt, one could see his fit physique. His eyes were green like palm leaves, and his hair was one shade of soft brown. He wondered if his mistress was from the imperial court and how she liked the snake kebab. Mistress liked peculiar dishes, so kebab was the way to go. Nothing better than a viper kebab for lunch. That way you can develop immunity to the venom. But if something goes wrong, you could die. The guy wanted to know more about her. He didn't even know how she ended up in a place like this. Was she really attracted by the sights? But she just wanted to practice, she said thoughtfully, looking out the window. Serena found herself in the southern part of the continent. It was an unknown place to her, and the decision to find a guide was a very sensible one. She was helped by the same young man. She was going to go into the jungle, and it would be impossible without a guide, for such a journey could cost a life. She thought it would take her a long time to find a guide. The companion smiled and objected. Southerners are not afraid of rainforests. Making sure no one was listening, he continued in a conspiratorial tone. There is something that even they fear. It was Shahat. Did he really mean Yoma? Shahada means ghost in the imperial language. This creature devours people's hearts. There is probably no creature more bloodthirsty than this. That it existed was an undeniable fact, for the lad himself had met Shahat once and fortunately survived. He began unbuttoning his shirt, intent on showing the outcome of their encounter. From the beginning of his chest to his waist, a huge and wide scar could be seen on his athletic body. It felt as if it was left behind by a sword. The blow was directed at vital organs, which could speak to the level of the opponent. This level is comparable to the level of the first instructor, the best in shadow of death. Unwittingly remembering her, Serena became worried and suggested maybe she was around somewhere. The green-eyed boy silently put his shirt back on and glanced every now and then as Serena's hand held the sheath that contained her sword. Shahada is a powerful ghost. Serena must be careful. That's exactly what her boyfriend warned her about. The mistress sat pensive, but thanked her for the advice. Night came on, the moon rising higher and higher in a sky that was showered with stars. Serena had something akin to insomnia. She lay resting her gaze on the sword that had always been by her side. She had little faith in the ghost that devoured hearts. Though she had seen a possible victim who had told her about it herself, her thoughts wandered around that very ghost, and it involuntarily led her to the fact that if they really existed, then there was a chance of seeing those she cared about. Slender girlish fingers reached for the sword. She began to recall images of people dear to her, her father, and the teachers. I wish I could tell them one more time. She was alone in this world, and there was no one closer to her than these people. These thoughts made her sad, and she had a ghostly hope to see those who were no longer in the human world. But hope is a treacherous thing. Some woman, dressed in white and blue, with long white hair as if it had just snowed and looked like a snow queen, shouted, "Everio!" into the void. She ordered a blizzard to be summoned, and across from her stood Serena, watching her. Something dangerous was coming. The girl covered her face with the back of her hands. Sevilla was the name of the Snow Queen. She had once been a hero, admired by all, and Serena remembered that too. But Savile was tired of playing that role. She wanted to forget about it. She also warned the young heroine that the same fate could await her as well. The hero's worthless life is nothing but ruin. But what did she mean by that? Serena wanted to know more because her life was at stake, and Savile offered to show it to her, right now. A cry of Everio, and an order to impale the heroine. Infinite ice. Serena was startled. Did her interlocutor really just want to show something off? Thank God it was only a dream from which the dreamer awoke. Nightmares had become commonplace for her, and she was starting to get used to them. There was a white snake in her bed, which she threw out the window as an unnecessary thing and immersed herself in memories. It's been 3 years now, since she destroyed the shadows of death. During this time, she managed to go through a lot while traveling about the continent. She wanted to build a good reputation for her family. I had to take on any challenge. Serena was able to defeat the eight-eyed mistress of the Dark Mountain. And even Kurt, the first-ranking. But involuntarily, Sevilla came to mind. I wonder why that day she was so angry. What could make a hero become a bandit leader? These questions have not been answered yet. A boy came into her room wearing a white t-shirt, embroidered with neat patterns around the edges, black shorts, and high sandals. His eyes were an amazing color of purple, and his hair was dark. He had 4 white stripes on his swarthy face, 2 on one side and 1 on the other. He was looking for Serena, and he found her guide. The expediter was clearly younger than Serena, both in age and height. This surprised the girl. His name is Raja. He is an experienced guide in this village. Raja's words made an impression on the customer, saying how could such a young man be experienced? But he didn't care. Could anyone really care about his age? It was a dangerous case, and that's why Serena was worried. The young guide offered another option, to wait until Harva finished his work. The boy had been paid in advance, so he didn't care. Time is of the essence, and Serena couldn't put it off. I had no choice but to accept the services of a young guide, as long as he did not fail. The man's hands gently held a papyrus with text written on it. Complete the assigned task in the last village of the southern jungle, making contact with the target. A strange adult man was squatting under the wooden staircase of a house and reading a letter, which clearly caused him indignation, and the passers-by residents only threw strange glances at him, thinking that he was some kind of lunatic. This man had met us before. To everyone he was dead, but his life went on. The letter he was reading was from his superiors. It sounded like they were asking a lot, but Ken knew what he was getting into, and yet his indignation was unbounded. He was sent to the middle of nowhere, and he was given an unexplained directive. All problems must be solved as they came. The first thing to do is to find a guide, but the prices for them are crazy. Demon couldn't afford to pay a huge sum for a forwarder. A boy walked past him, singing a tune to himself under his breath. Ken noticed him. It was the same guide Serena had hired. He asked the stranger if he was looking for a guide to the southern village, immediately suggesting that they head to a local vacant lot where they would. Raju knew the way, but he could not undo the earlier arrangement. He spoke of himself with pride, for he was considered the best guide. What he was so boastful about was unclear. The demon only looked at him indifferently and replied dryly, "Oh yes, Raj forgot to say the most important thing. There are only 2 guides for their village." Ken had to hurry up. Just the 2 of them. And I was so eager to hire on the cheap, but the villain didn't give up and wanted to find another option. Even though it was hard, a white snake appeared out of nowhere. And there were plenty of them here. She crawled on top of Demon's head. The latter only looked at her fearfully and tried to pull her away with his hand. Swearing foully, he took it off and threw it away, taking a jar of antidote out of her bag and immediately swallowing it before it was too late. The formidable man was frightened of her, or maybe of how it happened, and now he was lying on the ground. Ken couldn't grasp how a white snake ended up on his head. Sounds were heard, which he turned his attention to. It was a snake that crawled into Serena's bed and now happens to be on her former teacher's head. He hadn't seen Serena fully and assumed that the whole thing had been set up for him on purpose. There were a lot of snakes in the village, and even if he blamed someone in particular, they wouldn't believe him. That's a very clever tactic. Well, today our demon man is kind enough to let them have that liberty, but next time no one will just get away with it. The angry gentleman was called out by a guy grinning through his teeth, and once again, Serena's new acquaintance. He inquired what was wrong with the gentleman. Perhaps he was hungry, and offered him their specialty, snake kebab. You'd think Ken was being bullied or conspired against. For a resident of these regions, this kind of kebab is very tasty, and he is ready to share it for free. The demon's anger was at an end. It seemed as if his calm face was about to turn into a fury of emotion, which is what happened. The first thing he did was to cut up the poor snake, which was already dead, and was pointing his weapon at the neck of a welcoming resident who couldn't make out what was the matter. Now Demon was asking directly why he had arranged all this, including the earlier incident. Is this some kind of taunt? The one hurriedly explained, after all, it was their national dish, which even the noble lady liked. For the residents, such food was the absolute norm. Only the foreigners didn't understand it. The mention of the lady excited Demon. The provocateur did not back down, and continued to blame the inhabitant for their foolish traditions. Why was it the norm for them to feed poisonous creatures to travelers? What would have happened without the antidote at hand? Ken was breaking down in doubt and the residents' intentions. Maybe he wanted to knock him out and steal the money, or take him far away into the jungle and let him die there? Or is it really the norm to receive guests in this way? If that was the case, why would the villain want to keep him alive? What he didn't keep quiet about, and that scared the kid more and more, who was now on his knees apologizing and almost sobbing. Mistakes have to be paid for, Demon said, but now he remembered his original purpose, what he had come to this village to do, and asked the intimidated fellow if he knew how to get to the last village of the south. He replied cheerfully that he knew. It was an answer Demon hadn't even counted on. With a wicked grin on his face, it was as if he'd passed judgment. The kid would now be his guide. Under the force of fear, he had no choice but to agree. He was very afraid to go there, but he tried not to show it. Ken remembered what the boy had told him. Now, I decided to clarify. Is it true that he is the second person from the village who knows the way in the right direction? To which the man, stammering, could not answer. He was crippled with fear. Ken didn't care about that. He decided to scare him even more, reminding him that he could make his punishment come true. It had its effect, the boy stammered, but quickly said yes. The demon allowed time to pack and exulted over what he'd managed to save. Even a seemingly desperate situation had managed to get a guide for free. The villain was proud of himself. As time passed, joy turned to discontent. He and his guide were knee-deep in swamp. What's that supposed to mean? You call yourself a guide and you don't hear a word about the swamp? What kind of unprofessionalism? But there was no point in blaming, because the guide had warned us about it. It wasn't a good time to figure out who was guilty, but we had to get out or it would get worse. Ken already had a rope in his hand, which he pulled out of his bag. With a well-studied motion, he twirled the tree trunk with it and pulled it toward him. The guide watched his companion's actions. To him, it was a kind of magic. He had never seen a rope used so skillfully. Such a reaction annoyed the demon. Was the village so packed that they hadn't seen anything like this? Giving him a warning that if the guide continued with his heresy, he would leave him here. That frightened the already frightened guide very much. What an adventure, thought Ken, but then he heard a promise that he would do his duties better next time. The next time was no better. The inexperienced guide found a hive of bees that stung him to such an extent that his face was devastated. Luckily, his companion had some pills that he gave him. The further into the forest, the more wood. It started to rain, and now the boy clumsily dropped his rucksack into the river. The food sailed away with the backpack, there are no other supplies, and I want to eat. The demon was not greedy in that way and shared his food, to which the guide was immensely grateful. But these situations came one after another, and it made Demon very tired and angry. Bad thoughts began to enter his head. Maybe it was to drown him in the swamp. A sunny day. A picturesque maze of greenery stretching to the horizon. In this natural riot, tall trees formed dense domes, creating a dense green carpet interspersed with bright colors of various plants. The branches of the trees intertwine with each other, creating shade and giving the impression of impenetrable green curtains. The young guide led his mistress, cautioning her not to step into the swamp. One false step and you're out of luck. Serena was supposed to follow the guide strictly, but she had her own way. The fearless warrior walked through the swamp like Jesus walked on water, fearing nothing at all. Was it really possible? Raja looked at his companion in surprise. Of course you can. The main thing is to move your feet quickly. It's easier than walking on water. But quite by accident, Serena didn't notice how she'd gotten her face in front of a beehive. But only the guide didn't even take the time to warn her. As Serena began to be surrounded by all the residents of this little house, they were very unhappy to be disturbed and decided to return the favor, but not in time. The bees were dropping dead, and Raja was amazed at how easily Serena had dealt with them. The training didn't go to waste. Serena shared a secret: when practicing on grains of sand, the insects become nothing, so it was easy. The boy stood with a bewildered expression and only gave out that he was glad for this outcome. This was followed by stronger opponents, such as the viper and the jaguar. But our mistress had them to her teeth. She dealt with them with ease and without sparing them. Swamp creatures were encountered, but all of them were killed to the ground. The companion began to wonder if his mistress was even human. Maybe he was imagining it all. Otherwise, what logical explanation could there be? A human modification? Definitely not. It was about Serena's training, running on the surface of the water, moderate consumption of poisons, and what became fatal was killing the thugs who were hunting her. All of which she was trained by a teacher who made her able to stand up for herself. Even with her training, the southern jungle doesn't come as easily to her as she would like it to be. But there was no time to waste, and they traveled further into the wild jungle. Raja looked pensive. Who knows what he was thinking? And so at last the heroes arrived at the second village. It is impossible not to mention the fact how conveniently villages are named. The first one you come across will be called the first, and so on. This was due to the fact that houses were constantly collapsing and people were moving from place to place. In order not to complicate life, residents simply numbered them. The travelers had come a long and dangerous way. It was time they had some refreshment, which the guide suggested. As they stood on the street, it was impossible not to notice the slanted glances Serena was getting from passers-by. Was it because they hated the Empire? But why should he? Raj thought. Serena wasn't stupid, and she'd noticed how the locals seemed to avoid her, so she asked directly. People were just minding their own business, was how Raja explained it. That's right, there's a village hunting competition coming up. It will be the greatest competition among all 5 villages. The inhabitants were hustling as best they could, building something out of the trees that were plentiful and helping each other out. Raja suggested that maybe she would like to participate too, since there are no special requirements. Frustratingly, she had to give up. There was no time to hunt. Her only goal is to restore her family's reputation and create a combined technique. And a hunting competition in a backwoods village is obviously not going to help that. Serena and Raja were chatting, but suddenly the former noticed something through the window near where they were having their meal. A girl with a long spear stood under the house. Her build was strong enough to hold the weapon without difficulty. She was dressed like a native of the area, with patterns painted on her upper arm and face. Her gaze was unkind, as if it didn't bode well. Having refreshed themselves, the boys traveled further afield. They were now at the 3rd village. But there was clearly something wrong with the entrance. There were pieces of wood all over the place. What could have happened here? Raja looked sadly at what had happened. And Our Lady has already started beating the entrance to visit the village after all. She ducked into the thicket, ordering Raja to stay and wait for her. The boy only saw her trail disappear. The heiress drew her flaming sword and was about to strike hard. He destroyed everything in his path and punched her further into the village. Serena looked at her with a serious gaze. At what happened in the village, standing by his fire. The picture was gruesome. There were breathless bodies lying on the ground that were completely covered in blood. It would have frightened anyone, and Serena wasn't without emotion either. Her eyes were filled with fear and compassion for those who had to endure such a thing. Blood was everywhere. It was impossible to step on this ground and keep your shoes clean. It seems as if all the inhabitants had been slaughtered. No one was left alive. But what she saw right now caught her in a panic. A strong man with a bare torso held a machete-like weapon in his hand. He stood over the innocent body that was his next victim. Serena could barely contain her panic and tears welled up in her eyes. The sight was not for the faint of heart. He noticed her and they crossed eyes. The maniac didn't seem upset. On the contrary, it seemed to make him euphoric. He stood over the victim, blood oozing from his body and machete. But it was as if he didn't notice it. In his hand was a heart that he had apparently just ripped out. To him, the human heart was a delicacy that he now fed on, which brought him pleasure. Seeing this scene, Serena was overcome with anger. She could no longer stand by and watch some maniac destroy innocent people and feed on their hearts. The heroine threw herself into the fight, intent on destroying the bastard. That one was not easy. His reaction was on point and he managed to defend himself. Even though Serena threw him a decent distance away, he did not rush to attack but sat back and licked his bloody weapon with satisfaction. The heiress noticed his huge knife that he used to cut people open, which meant that bones could be chopped with such a weapon without any problems. She remembered what the boy had told her when he was still in the 1st village. Shahad is an evil spirit, a ghost that eats people's hearts and almost kills that guy, but leaves a lifelong reminder of himself. There was no more doubt. Definitely in front of the girl was the same Shahad, because of which people were so afraid to go into the jungle and died one after another. Today he was lucky enough to meet Serena, for now the punishment for his sins is certain. Shahad was still sitting there smiling his evil smile. But a sharp jerk, and there, his machete reaches the neck of the lady. Just in time, she manages to block the enemy's attack by putting her sword in front of her and pushing the enemy away. Fencing in life is a very delicate art. A second's delay can cost a life. Serena knew it well and did not hesitate, attacking the enemy at once. That one was no slouch either, the enemy dodging very quickly with his strikes. His first blow hit the girl on the lower part of her left leg. It was painful, but Serena stood her ground. She was about to strike him again, sticking her sword into his stomach. Shahad skillfully did a backflip and managed to avoid injury, jumping a short distance from his rival. He still smirked at her attempts to hurt him in any way possible. It was clear that Serena was facing a serious opponent. She realized it even when she had to block his first attack. Seems like it's going to be a bit of a struggle. Serena spoke up, turning to Shahad. Isn't he afraid of death? Even though I was sure that creatures like him would stop at nothing. And as long as the opportunity to kill their victim looms before them, wounds and death are the least of their worries. Silence was his answer. Serena took it as a positive, preparing to take his life. She made it clear that she was ready to kill him. To which Shahad only continued to smile with a contortion of his face. Laughing, he rushed toward her. Serena didn't back up and used a third technique. Flame of War, a technique she never thought she'd master, but now she's mastered perfectly. Shahad stared mesmerized at the flames of war, trying to fend off the girl's attack with his machete. But the weapon was not so strong and broke under the onslaught of Serena's sword. It seemed as if the outcome of the battle was certain. The ghost stood at a loss, clearly not expecting the girl to be so strong. But that wasn't all. She continued to strike him one by one, aiming for his chest, and he defended himself as best he could, unable to go on the attack. Serena couldn't hit his chest, so she stripped him of his left bow by cutting her completely off, so much so that she fell to the ground. The girl was surprised at such a thing. She had hardly intended to cut off an entire arm. Shahad was still standing and was still conscious. A normal human would have fallen or died of shock long ago, but this was an unclean thing and it couldn't be killed so easily. He screamed in terror, an outcome he could not have predicted, and now he was making incoherent noises at times. There was nothing left for him to do but run away. But the girl was not going to let him go so easily, and rushed to run after him. She had this picture in front of her, a seated Shahad over a dead human body. At first she didn't understand what he was going to do. Then he stuck his hand into the man's ribcage, and I pulled out his heart. What kind of savagery is this? Did he decide to eat dead meat? Yes, he ate the heart just like last time, clearly enjoying the flavor. This food had a special effect on him. His arm began to regenerate, just like lizards when their tails fall off. Such a sight was impressive and proved that he was indeed not human. But what was it? Magic? No, it's not like he used his holy or demonic powers. Then how is that possible? His hand was the same. Its recent absence could only be spoken of by the scar that remained after regeneration. He now had plenty of strength to continue the battle. And Serena was trying to figure out who he was if he wasn't human. Her leg wound was still there, but the girl ignored it as if it were just a scratch. Not to take a long guess as to who he was, Serena asked directly about it. Only Shahad wanted to say a word, as a child's voice came from outside. "How are you?" They immediately turned their attention to Raju. Oh, bad timing, he found them. Realizing that he had disturbed them, Raja was going to get out of the way, and sooner rather than later. Shahad was quicker and took the boy in his arms, giving him no chance to run away. Serena couldn't help either, as the ghost was very fast and ran away with the boy. One last time, he told Serena about some village and ran off, not giving her a chance to catch up with him. But she wasn't one to give up so easily and abandon her own. So she rushed after the thief. To think he took a man hostage, and the food and stuff too. But Serena still had her sword. There was no choice, and she continued to rush after the kidnapper. A sturdy male foot stepped on the ground. This was the group that had gone into the jungle even earlier than Serena and Raj. Ken looked around with undisguised amazement at the surroundings they had arrived at. A huge wooden fence was smashed in front of them, and the grass was stained with blood. Were there any gangs that could do such a thing? No, there were definitely no such gangs, the guide replied. So it's something else. Walking a little farther, the guys noticed the pipes of people who were also covered in blood. Experienced villains must know the traces left by their kind, and our villain is no exception. He's on his way to find out what happened here. And I came to the conclusion that all the people were killed by one man, seemingly with a sword. But why bite the victims' bodies was a mystery to the seasoned villain. The bites were definitely not made with human teeth. And also, as Demon had learned, there was a collision here. The opponents were of equal strength, and the marks on the ground spoke of that. In short, the conclusion is as follows. This cannibal monster is on the same level as his opponent only because of his cannibalism. To think how much the villain learned through his attentiveness, and he was very close to the truth. The village smelled so-so. Most likely the corpses had begun to decompose and the smell was letting it be known. Someone asked the guys a question. If they were with the organization. Demon of course did not hurry with the answer, asked his own counter, wondering who was asking. Behind them stood a mulatto girl. On her beautifully sat a blue dress with white ornaments. Her hair was medium length and dark color, almost black. The girl introduced herself, flashing her blue eyes. Her name was Aisha. She had come from the last village to accompany their visitors. The guests followed the fragile girl. The demon in turn thought that she knew the road 100 times better than his scum companion did. They were welcomed in every village, setting lavish tables with food and giving wreaths of fresh flowers as if they were the most expected guests. But Ken could not calm down because of the accompanying girl. She seemed very suspicious to him. Demon again smelled something. This time he smelled a strong odor of fish. The faithful guide only glanced at his master every now and then. As soon as he had a moment, he wanted to escape, but Demon could not escape so easily. He immediately noticed that the boy wanted to do the legs. Now that he has a new guide, why should he have an old one who is every now and then causing trouble? Why not go back to his home? The boy was on the hook for the villain, and he made it clear to him that he would go with him all the way from beginning to end. For some reason, the demon needed the boy. After a long trek through the villages, they finally reached their destination. Before moving on, Ken once again intimidated his companion into not running away, leaving him alone. The three of them headed toward the hut, which was neatly constructed from improvised materials, with torches as lighting. The hut was surrounded by small gardens with palm trees and other native plants, giving it the feel of a secluded tropical retreat. Dropping to one knee, Aisha opened the curtain, informing her Lord Dirha that the guests had arrived, and now she was kindly inviting them to come through to the cabin. Mr. Durka confirmed, inviting the guests inside himself. The demon expressed his honor to the head of the village, which was very unusual for such a villain. Who knows, maybe he was really glad to meet. The guide was sitting on the sidelines trying to figure out what was going on. The flattery pleased the Lord. He only clarified that he just has a little influence over people. We can see that he looks different from the other villagers. His robes were similar to those worn by monks in Buddhist monasteries, only red in color and with the same ornaments so often found on the robes of other villagers. He gave off a light and relaxed vibe, but also a certain strength. He was smoking a hookah and smiling at his guests, inquiring why they had come. Ken had a hunch he knew why, so he didn't make any humor and spoke straightforwardly without hiding. The organization wants Dira-san to become a member of their organization. Such an offer aroused a lot of emotions in the guide, mostly resentment. Did he really demand that the village leader obey? And if he refused, he'd be in trouble, which made Dirch laugh. The ringleader was completely calm and decided to start by saying something. But what exactly? There's been a recent rampage in their territory. But there are plenty of them already. Which one is it? What is he even rubbing our demon in? He began to explain how he was different from the others. It was his claws, which are very fierce. If their guards fall, they will be in danger. Ken was puzzled. I mean, is there something so scary here that could scare off an old man who has spent his life eating poisonous snakes? If he's saying that to his guest, maybe they really don't have any worthy defenders. But that battle in the third village, it's been bugging him. Who could be so strong and bloodthirsty? Durka began to suspect something because there was an amazing coincidence. That passage, and now they were at his negotiating table. This suspicion really angered Ken. He also realized why the organization needed this old man, because he would make a villain out of him. Negotiations seem to have failed, for if you start threatening, you should go one way to the end and not ask what he wants. Now the ringleader was asking to take care of the problem he had voiced earlier. Ken took it as a kind of threat, but Durka didn't care how he thought about it. Well, the villain will not be able to rest, and will have to get his hands dirty in this shit. And by the way, the ringleader had one more thing to add. His eyesight was poor, and he would not always be able to distinguish his guest from the beast. To which the guest decided to hold back, with an offer to demonstrate the point of his sword. Then that way, he would definitely not confuse him with a beast. The chance of Ken's death would be the highlight of this hunt, and the ringleader graciously declined his offer. He also invited him to the banquet, for tomorrow they would both be busy. Perhaps the suggestion of a banquet did not appeal to the guests, and they hurried away, hoping not to become a possible victim. On the run, the guide suggested that Ken had screwed up big time, to which he only got angry, clarifying that he didn't do it on purpose. They ran with all their might, but an iron chain with a sharp hook began to reach them. A little more, and some of them would have fallen for it, but they bounced back in time, running farther and farther away. A girl flew at them, clearly wanting to harm them. Serena had seen this girl from the window while she was still eating lunch in the second village. She landed belligerently on the ground, which startled the guests, and was now putting her spear to the demon's neck, which she apparently carried with her everywhere she went. Having managed to detain the dear guests, Aisha approached them leisurely, emphasizing the fact of her guests' hurry with a playful smile, and she had so hoped the boys would have time to enjoy the banquet. The demon didn't like wasting time, which he didn't hide. The guide, meanwhile, stood behind him, shrinking in fear. The warrior woman pointed her spear at Ken, saying that his face was familiar to her, as if she might have seen him somewhere before. She saw him in the soul of the devil. Ken had no idea what she was talking about. You'd think she was crazy. But the demon looked like he knew what he was talking about. So now he has to fight these women? It could have been a 2-on-2 battle, but the guide was shaking with fear, and the chances that he would fight were very doubtful. The demon would have to fight for both of them, one with an iron hook, one with a spear. What should he do? In his hands was only a sword and the will to survive. So she began to defend herself against the attackers. The first thing he did was jump up and ask his enemies for their shurikens, which the women were now trying to serve. All the guy did was yell and try to hide further away, somewhere safer. When he saw the shuriken stuck in the ground, he looked at it with admiration, like a child at the first snow. He had never seen something like this before. Ken pulled out his rope, which had already saved more than just his life once, and wanted to use it again. But that was not to be, for the woman's sharp spear tore through her. What would be the outcome at this rate?